My true story from Alabama. Mama, don't embarrass me today. Just go in the storeroom and stay quiet until I call you. Emily's family doesn't need to see all this. He didn't even look me in the eye. My own son, Thomas, taller than his daddy ever was, hands so steady when he was a boy, now trembling with nerves and shame as he stood at my kitchen door, blocking the sun. He was dressed too fine for a Tuesday, his best shirt pressed, hair slicked down the way I used to do for him in the 3rd grade, back before he decided I was someone to hide. His fiancée was coming, the one with the family money and the city ways. I'd never met her. All I knew was that Thomas talked about her as if she was royalty, and our home was a shack. But this house is the one my husband built with his own hands, plank by plank, long before Thomas was even a thought in my head. "I'll call you when we're done," he said, lowering his voice as if the neighbors might hear. "Don't come out for any reason. Please, Mama." I mean it. There was no room for arguing. He was already reaching for the old storeroom key, the one that hung on a nail by the back door since before he was born. I watched his hands, the same hands I'd held through fevers and thunderstorms, now slipping that cold brass key between his fingers like it was a secret weapon. My heart beat, so loud I thought for a second maybe he'd hear it and change his mind. But all he saw was his own reflection in the hallway mirror, straightening his collar, smoothing his hair. Not a glance for me. Not even a thank you for the bread rising in the oven, or the curtains washed and pressed, or the Sunday best tablecloth spread out just in case someone wanted to see what love looks like in linen. He pushed the door open and gestured for me to step inside. I hesitated for just a breath, standing at the threshold of everything I'd ever given him and everything he'd just taken away with a single embarrassed glance. "Go on," he said, not cruel but not gentle either. "Please. Just for a little while." I stepped in. I could feel the coolness of the concrete under my feet, the smell of old cardboard, apple peels, and last year's Christmas decorations. The light bulb overhead flickered once, then steadied. The shelves were lined with jars of blackberry jam, the kind Thomas used to sneak by the spoonful when he thought I wasn't looking. My apron was still smudged with flour. My hands still smelled of soap and onions. The door closed behind me with a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't a slam, just a soft, tired click. Then the metallic scrape of the key turning, and I was alone. From the other side of the door, I could hear Thomas moving quickly through the kitchen, opening windows for fresh air, rearranging chairs so nobody would see the worn spots. He turned on music in the parlor, that expensive Bluetooth speaker Emily gave him for Christmas. I stood in the half-dark and listened as he became a stranger in his own home, his voice suddenly careful, his laugh forced and brittle. Then her voice, high and sweet, carrying through the thin walls. "Oh, Tommy, this is adorable. It's just so quaint. Like something out of a movie. Did your mom decorate all this herself?" I wanted to answer her, to come out and say, yes, I did. Every stitch and every shelf. But I just stood there, hands wringing the edge of my apron, listening. Thomas's reply came, and it felt like the second knife in my back. "It's just old stuff. We're planning on remodeling soon. You know, modernizing. My mom's she's not really here much." Liar, I thought, but not with anger, just a dull ache, the kind that settles in your bones after too many cold winters. I'd been here every day of his life. I was here when he broke his arm on the tire swing. Here when he brought home spelling bees and bruised knuckles, and the girl with freckles who gave him his first heartbreak. Here when he called crying after his father died, even though he pretended not to need me. Here for every fever, every blessing, every mistake. And here now, locked away so the world wouldn't see me. The voices grew fainter as they moved through the house. Emily's heels tapped across the hardwood I scrubbed by hand, her laughter ringing like glass. I could picture her running her fingers along the mantel, wrinkling her nose at the family photos in mismatched frames. She was polite enough, I suppose. She didn't say anything cruel out loud, but the pause before every compliment was an insult all its own. From where I sat on an overturned bucket, I watched sunlight crawl through the crack under the door, tracing the dust on my shoes. I tried to remember the last time Thomas hugged me for no reason, The last time he called me Mama without embarrassment. I closed my eyes and listened to the music, pretending it was just another afternoon, that I was hiding for a surprise party, that any minute now he'd burst in laughing and say it was all a joke. But it wasn't a joke. After a while, the voices drifted outside. I heard the porch door open, then the sound of tires crunching on gravel. My hands had gone numb. My heart had gone somewhere I couldn't follow. I counted to 100 and back, just to keep from crying. The lock turned again, slow this time. The door creaked open. Thomas stood there, not meeting my eyes, not even pretending. He just said, "It's over.
You can come out now."
Emily thought the house was fine, but she's got ideas about the wedding. She wants something different. She's not used to families like ours. He left it hanging, like a shirt without a hook. I nodded, because that's what mothers do. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve, straightened my back, and walked into the empty kitchen as if I'd never been locked away at all. I looked at the table, 2 empty coffee cups, a half-eaten slice of my bread. Not a crumb left for me. He looked at me, his face already slipping into the mask he wears for the world. "Thanks, Mama. Sorry about the situation. You understand, right?" I didn't answer. I just went back to the storeroom, shut the door softly behind me, and sat down among the jars of jam and boxes of forgotten toys. I pressed my palm to my chest and felt my heart beating, steady as ever, even when the rest of me felt invisible. That was the day I realized you can give someone your whole life, your best years, your last dollar, and still find yourself locked away when company comes. But what they don't know is that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is the strongest answer there is. That night, I didn't cry. I wrote it all down in my notebook, the storeroom, the words, the click of the lock. Every insult. Every bruise that didn't show on skin. Because this story isn't over. Not by a long shot. After that day in the storeroom, something inside me settled into a cold, quiet ache, the kind that wraps around your heart and makes itself at home. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the click of the lock and Thomas's voice, steady, practiced, as if he'd been hiding me all his life and I'd only just noticed. In the stillness of my little kitchen, I boiled water for tea and sat by the window, watching moonlight turn the magnolia, leaves silver. The old house creaked the way it does when the weather's about to turn, and I felt every year in my bones. 67 winters in Alabama, some harder than others, but none as cold as this. I picked up my old notebook, the one with the blue marbled cover, and started writing it all down. Every word, every detail, every breath I'd held in. My hand shook at first, but then the words came easier, flowing like the creek out back after a storm. I wrote about the shame on Thomas's face, the way he looked right through me. I wrote about Emily's eyes, sharp and curious, skimming the room as if she was counting all the ways she'd change it. I wrote about the little things Thomas had forgotten, like how the curtains in the parlor were sewn from scraps of his father's shirts, or how the oak table in the dining room was carved with initials from every child who'd ever eaten there, his cousins, his best friend from grade school, even the neighbor girl with the red ribbon in her hair. I wrote it all because I was afraid, deep down, that I'd forget too. That one day I'd wake up and this life, with all its quiet sacrifices, would be nothing but a faded photograph in someone else's album. The next morning, I called my sister Ruth in Mobile. She answered on the first ring, her voice as bright as always. "Well, if it isn't Mabel, up before the chickens. What's got you awake this early?" "Just needed to hear a friendly voice," I said, keeping my tone light. "You sound tired," she replied. "Everything all right over there?" I hesitated. Ruth and I never had the kind of relationship where you told every little pain. We grew up on the same red clay, but we wore our secrets like sweaters, sometimes tight, sometimes loose, but always there. Still, she was the only person left in this world who remembered Thomas as a boy, remembered the good parts. "Thomas had his fiancée over yesterday," I said, forcing a smile into my words. "Nice girl, from what I could hear. I didn't get to meet her, though." There was a pause on the line. Ruth knew better than to push, but she always heard more than I meant to say. "Well, That's something, she finally replied. Next time, I hope you get more than just a peek from behind a door. I changed the subject quickly, asking about her garden and the squash she'd been struggling to keep alive. We talked about nothing for 20 minutes, but when I hung up, I felt lighter, somehow. Just knowing someone in this world cared whether or not I was seen. That afternoon, I sat on the front porch, knitting a scarf for the church bazaar. It was a warm, sticky day, summer holding on for dear life. The children from next door ran past, barefoot and shouting, chasing a stray dog that had wandered down our streets in spring. One of them, little Ellie, stopped at the gate. "Miss Mabel, can you help me with my math homework again? Mama said you're the smartest lady on this street." Her face was freckled, hair in wild pigtails. She reminded me of Thomas at that age. Wide-eyed, hungry for praise. "Of course, honey. Bring your notebook tomorrow after school. I'll have cookies, too." She grinned and ran off, her laughter lingering in the thick air long after she'd gone. I thought of Thomas, grown and gone, but not really gone at all. I wondered when exactly he'd started seeing me as a burden instead of a blessing, as something to be hidden instead of someone to be loved. The next few days passed quietly. I baked bread, weeded the garden, swept the porch. Thomas didn't call, and I didn't expect him to. The house was filled with echoes of his baby laughter, his teenage arguments, his late-night footsteps when he thought I was asleep. I tried not to let the silence swallow me. One evening, the phone rang. For a moment, I let it ring, not wanting to sound too eager. When I finally answered, it was Thomas. His voice was tight, rushed. "Mama, hey. Emily's folks are planning a big engagement party next weekend. I need you to, well, just don't come by, okay? Emily wants it at her parents' place in Birmingham. It's going to be different." He paused, waiting for me to protest. I didn't. "All right, Thomas. I understand." He sighed, relief plain in his voice. "Thanks, Mama. I knew you'd get it. I'll make it up to you, promise." After he hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the patterns in the wood with my thumb. I remembered every meal we'd shared there, every candlelit birthday, every long talk after a hard day. I remembered holding him as he cried over his father, over his failures, over girls who broke his heart. And now, here I was, shut out of his joy, as if I were nothing but another relic to be packed away and forgotten. But something was changing in me, slow and steady as the tide. I wasn't angry, not really. I was sad, yes, but beneath that sadness was a stubborn kind of hope, the kind that comes from surviving worse than this.
I would not beg to be seen.
I would not plead for a seat at a table I'd built with my own hands. That night, I wrote again in my notebook. I wrote about the way the world shrinks and expands with love and loss, about the courage it takes to stand quietly in your own home and let someone else decide whether you're worth being introduced. I wrote about the power of memory, about how silence can be a shield and a weapon both. As I closed the notebook and set it on the nightstand, I made myself a promise. I would not let bitterness take root. I would not let shame turn my heart hard. If Thomas wanted to keep me locked away, that was his burden to bear. I would carry mine with grace. The next morning, I put on my best dress and walked to church. I smiled at my neighbors, hugged the children, handed out slices of fresh bread at the fellowship hall. No one there cared if my house was quaint or if my curtains matched. They just cared that I showed up, that I listened, that I loved. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. The world is full of people who'd rather forget where they came from. But some of us, those of us who have known sorrow and survived it, know that quiet doesn't mean weak. Sometimes the softest voice carries the heaviest truth. That week, I made a decision. I would start offering free reading lessons at the library for children who struggled the way Thomas once did. I put up a flyer and waited. Within days, I had 3 mothers at my door, grateful and shy, bringing homemade jam and stories of their own heartbreaks. Every afternoon, the children filled my living room with questions and laughter. I saw my son in each of them, their curiosity, their quick tempers, their need to be loved without conditions. I baked for them, listened to them, and taught them the way I'd taught Thomas, with patience, with hope, with a love that asks for nothing in return. As autumn crept in, painting the leaves gold and red, my house was full of life again. The storeroom was just a room, no longer a prison. I unlocked it every morning, letting the light in, determined to fill the shadows with kindness and memory. Because if there's one thing life has taught me, it's that you don't have to shout to change the world. Sometimes, the quietest people leave the deepest marks. And sometimes, the people who lock you away are the ones who need your love the most. I kept the notebook on my nightstand and wrote in it every night. The pages filled up with stories, memories, and the ache of being hidden away. I didn't show anyone. It was just for me, for the part of me that wanted to remember every detail, so I wouldn't shrink down to the size of a rumor or a complaint whispered behind closed doors. The days after that storeroom humiliation stretched on, slow and sticky, as summer bled into fall. I got busy with the library children and the little ones from the neighborhood who came for reading, for cookies, for stories. Word spread fast among mothers at the grocery store. Miss Mabel's teaching again. Some of them remembered me from the school, back before I retired. You always had patience for the ones nobody else could reach, they said, and I smiled, though my heart felt as fragile as a robin's egg. Every child brought their own trouble through my door. Henry stuttered so bad he wouldn't speak above a whisper. Daisy couldn't sit still, her hands always fidgeting with her sleeves. And little Jamie, so stubborn and wild, who only listened if you told a story first. They were a noisy, joyful bunch, and I gave them everything I had, every lesson, every recipe, every scrap of patience and hope. Most afternoons, after the last child left and the house grew quiet again, I would sit by the window with a cup of sweet tea and watch the street. Sometimes I saw Thomas's car drive past, headed home from work or off to Emily's place. He never stopped in. He called every few days, his voice full of small talk and avoidance. "How are you, Mama?" he'd ask. "Fine, Thomas."
Busy.
"How's the wedding planning?"
He'd sigh.
"Oh, it's all Emily and her mother now. They want everything perfect. You remember how that goes." But I didn't remember it, not really. Our wedding was a potluck under the pecan trees with pies and laughter, a day built on love and necessity, not matching silver or rented linen. I wanted to say this to him, but he was always in a hurry. Sometimes he'd let something slip. "Emily's mother wants me to join her club. Says it's good for networking. They don't really know much about where I grew up." I bit my tongue, tasted blood, and let the silence fill the gap. He'd always been a boy who wanted to belong, even if it meant hiding the roots that made him strong. One afternoon, Ruth called again. She liked to check in when she thought I might be lonely. "I saw a picture of Thomas and that fiancé of his on the internet," she said, her voice brisk but not unkind. Big smiles. "You'd think they were royalty, the way they dress up." I tried to keep my voice steady. "He seems happy." "Well," Ruth huffed, I hope he remembers who made him all those birthday cakes and sewed his costumes for the school play. Rich girls forget, but mothers remember." I smiled in the dark, thinking of all the costumes, cowboys, pirates, even a scarecrow one year, with straw poking out everywhere. Thomas was always the loudest in the room back then, never afraid to take up space. When had he learned to be ashamed of me? Sunday came, and I walked to church, wearing my blue dress with the pearl buttons, the one Thomas picked out for me on my 60th birthday. I sat in my usual pew and listened to the preacher talk about forgiveness and humility. I felt the weight of every hidden wound. Afterward, people hugged me, asked after my garden, slipped me prayer requests for sick relatives or wayward sons. "God's not through with you yet, Miss Mabel," Pastor Lane said, pressing my hand. Sometimes the quietest voices move mountains. That night, I dreamed I was back in the storeroom. Only this time the door wouldn't open. I pounded on it until my fists ached, but no one came. I woke up in the dark, gasping for breath, tangled in sheets, the memory of that click haunting my ears. The next day, I cleaned the storeroom from top to bottom. I pulled out every box, every jar, every memory. I found Thomas's old baseball glove, still stained with red dirt. His science fair ribbons, dusty but bright. I stacked everything neatly, as if making an altar to the boy he once was, the boy who brought me dandelions and called me his hero. That evening, just as I finished, there was a knock at my back door. I wiped my hands and opened it to find Ellie, the neighbor's daughter, clutching a paper in her hand. "Miss Mabel, I got an A on my spelling test. Mama said to thank you. She made a pie. Can I bring you a slice?" I hugged her tight, feeling something in my chest uncoil. "Of course, honey. Tell your mama she's welcome to come, too." We sat on the porch, sharing pie, talking about school and dreams, and the kinds of things that matter more than gold or silver. For a few minutes, I forgot all about being hidden, all about Thomas and his secrets. After Ellie left, I watched the sun go down behind the trees. The air was soft and golden, the world so full of small kindnesses it almost hurt. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "You can lock a woman in a room, but you can't lock away her love, or her memory, or her worth." I slept with the window open, letting the autumn air fill my lungs, and I dreamed not of storerooms, but of open doors. The next week, I got a letter in the mail, thick, expensive paper, my name written in careful script. It was an invitation to Thomas and Emily's engagement party at her parents' home in Birmingham. Formal attire, the card said, and beneath that, in Thomas's handwriting, a note, "Hope you can make it, Mama. Please just be yourself." I sat at the table for a long time, tracing the raised letters with my finger. It felt like a test, a chance to be paraded out for display, or hidden in plain sight. I set the invitation aside. I wasn't sure I'd go, because now, for the first time in a long time, I was building a life that didn't depend on being seen by my son. I had children who needed me, friends who called just to hear my voice, a town that remembered my kindness even when my own blood tried to forget it. And somewhere deep inside, I could feel a new kind of strength growing, quiet, unbreakable, born from years of love and loss. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply to keep living, loving, and refusing to disappear. I set the invitation on the kitchen table, where the afternoon sun fell through the window and made the gold edges glimmer. For days, I moved around it like a memory I couldn't quite face. I'd never been one for big parties, and the idea of walking into Emily's family's home, so grand, so new, so far from the life I'd built here in Alabama, set my heart to fluttering. Still, I could hear Thomas's voice in my head, the little note, "Please, just be yourself." As if the only reason he needed to remind me was because the real me made him nervous. The week before the party, Ruth called again. "You going?" she asked, and I could hear her sipping her coffee, bold as brass. "I haven't decided," I told her. "I don't know what I'd even wear." "Well, honey, you go if you want to and don't if you don't. Just remember, you're not there to impress anyone. You're there to let them see you." That sounded good coming from her, but I wasn't sure I believed it. I'd spent a lifetime being invisible, first as a shy girl with hand-me-down dresses, then as a young wife following my husband through the storms, then as a mother who put everyone else first. Sometimes I wondered if I was even meant to be seen at all. I tried on every dress in my closet. The blue one was too worn, the black one too heavy. At last, I found a simple cream-colored dress with pearl buttons. I brushed my hair, pinned it up the way my husband always liked, and wore my silver locket with Thomas's baby picture inside. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to see what Emily's family would see, a woman who'd worked, loved, lost, and kept going anyway. When the day came, I rode the bus to Birmingham, clutching a thrift store handbag in my lap, feeling like a visitor in my own life. Emily's parents' house was as grand as I'd feared, 3 stories tall, all white columns and perfect green grass, like something out of a magazine. There were cars lined up along the curb and people in suits and dresses that looked new and stiff. I stood at the end of the walk, steadying myself. I could have turned around, gone home to my quiet kitchen, but something inside me said no, not this time. I walked up the path and rang the bell. Emily herself opened the door, all painted lips and perfect smile. She looked surprised for half a second, then recovered.
"Oh,
"You made it. Thomas didn't say for sure you'd come." I smiled, polite. Thank you for inviting me. She led me through the house, pointing out every painting and vase, as if she was giving a museum tour. There were people everywhere, sipping champagne, laughing too loudly. I felt my knees wobble, but I kept my chin high. When I finally saw Thomas across the room, he was talking to Emily's father and a group of young men in expensive suits. He looked happy, nervous, out of place, and trying not to show it. When he noticed me, his face went blank for just a second, as if he'd forgotten I might come. Then he walked over, his smile too wide. Mama, you look, nice. Let me introduce you. He took me from group to group, and everywhere we went, I felt eyes looking me over, my old dress, my simple shoes, the soft lines of my face. Emily's mother greeted me with a cold handshake, her perfume sharp enough to sting my nose. So, you're Thomas's mother, she said, her eyes never quite meeting mine. What a pleasure. You must be very proud. I am, I said, and left it at that. People asked questions, but no one listened to the answers. They wanted to know what I did, where I lived, if Thomas had always been so ambitious. I told them I'd been a nurse, that I lived in the same house for 40 years, that Thomas had always been smart and kind. But their smiles faded as soon as I finished, already looking past me for someone more important. Dinner was served in a room with ceilings high enough for birds. The table gleamed with silver and crystal, and every plate was a work of art. I sat at the far end, near the window. Emily's parents talked about trips to Europe and new cars. Thomas nodded, tried to keep up, but he looked tired, a little lost. At some point, a woman leaned over and whispered, "It's so nice that Thomas's family could come. You must be excited for him to move up in the world." I stared at her, trying to find some kindness behind her perfect makeup. "He was never beneath anyone," I said softly, but I don't think she heard me. Later, as people mingled in the parlor, I stood by the fireplace, listening to their voices blend together. Every so often, Thomas would glance my way, as if checking to see if I was still there. I saw him flinch when someone mentioned old Alabama money and how Emily was marrying up. No one asked about his father, about the little house with the pecan trees, about the sacrifices that built the life he was running from. After an hour, I excused myself, saying I needed some air. Outside, I sat on the wide porch steps, breathing deep. The sky was just starting to turn pink, the world softening around the edges. I thought about leaving, catching the next bus home. But then Thomas came out, sitting beside me, his shoulders slumped. He stared at his hands. "Sorry, Mama. This is all just a lot. Emily's family, they mean well, but they don't get it. They don't get us." I waited silent, the way you do when you know the person next to you has to find their own words. He glanced at me, almost shy again. "You okay?" I nodded. "I've been through worse." We sat there a long time, neither of us saying much, just letting the air cool and the world slow down. When it was time to go, Thomas squeezed my hand. He didn't say thank you. He didn't apologize. But he didn't have to. Some things a mother just knows. On the bus ride home, I looked out the window at the lights of Birmingham, thinking of all the people in that house, their laughter echoing like wind through empty rooms. I thought about my quiet house, my garden, the children who came for stories and cookies. I thought about the storeroom, and how sometimes the loneliest place isn't a locked door, but a room full of people who can't see you. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "It hurts to be hidden, but sometimes it hurts worse to be seen by people who don't really look." I slept with the locket in my hand, Thomas's baby face pressed warm against my palm, and I dreamed of open doors and a home that didn't need to be explained to anyone. The Monday after the engagement party, the house felt especially quiet, as if even the walls were holding their breath. I watered the garden in the early light, letting my hands sink into the good black earth. It was the one thing that always brought me peace. My tomatoes had finally started to ripen, their skins taut and shining, and I picked a basketful for the neighbor, Miss Geneva, who couldn't bend like she used to. The children came for reading in the afternoons, filling the rooms with laughter and the thump of sneakers on hardwood. Still, I carried a heaviness with me, as if I'd brought some of that stiff, silent Birmingham air back to my little house. I tried not to let it show. I baked for the church bazaar, mended Ruth's old tablecloth, listened to the radio when the loneliness got too loud. At night, I wrote page after page in my notebook, scribbling out every thought I was too proud to say aloud. I wrote about the look on Thomas's face when he saw me at the party, how pride and shame fought in his eyes. I wrote about Emily's mother's cold smile, the way she held her wine glass like a shield. I wrote about being hidden and about being paraded out like a relic, both kinds of loneliness, both kinds of hurt. The next weekend, Thomas stopped by unannounced, his car rumbling up the driveway just as I was pulling cornbread from the oven. He didn't knock, just let himself in the way he used to when he was little, dropping his backpack and heading straight for the kitchen. "Hey, Mama." I looked up, surprised to see him alone.
Thomas.
"You hungry?" He nodded, dropping into a chair at the table, but his eyes darted everywhere but at me. I set a plate in front of him, collards, cornbread, and a slice of ham, everything he loved as a boy. He ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of his fork on the plate. Finally, he spoke. "Emily's mom wants to know if you consider, well, maybe just letting them handle the wedding stuff. Emily has a vision for it. They want to keep things simple." Simple. That word again, as if the life I built was too messy, too loud, too much for company. "I see," I said, keeping my voice steady. "That's fine, Thomas. You do what you need." He flinched, like he'd expected a fight. "Mama, it's just Emily's family. They have expectations. I know you and Dad didn't have much, but it's different now." I set my teacup down carefully. "We had enough, Thomas. We had each other." He swallowed hard, staring at the tabletop. "It's just for appearances, Mama. Just until the wedding." I nodded, swallowing the ache that threatened to rise in my throat. "You go on, and do what makes you happy. I'm not here to make trouble." He reached across the table, fingers brushing mine. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who brought me dandelions, the boy who needed me to chase away the dark. But he pulled his hand back quick, as if remembering something shameful. After he left, I sat at the table for a long time, the cornbread going cold. I let myself grieve, not just for the wedding I wouldn't help plan, but for the distance that had settled between us, thick as dust on old photo frames. I grieved for the boy I'd raised, and for the mother I was now, always on the other side of the door, always waiting to be let in. Later that night, Ruth called. She never waited for permission to speak her mind. "You sound tired, Mabel." "I am, a little." "That boy's luckier his mother. That's all I'll say. If it were my son treating me like a forgotten suitcase, I'd tan his hide." I chuckled, a real laugh for the first time in days. I suppose I raised him to fit in anywhere. I just never thought anywhere would mean a place I'm not welcome. "You're welcome here any day. And so is that sweet potato pie you make." I promised her a pie, though I knew she was just trying to make me feel needed. That's what sisters do. The next day, I cleaned the storeroom top to bottom, sorting through jars and boxes, tossing what was broken and keeping what was whole. I found Thomas's baby shoes tucked in an old tin, still laced, still tiny. I held them in my hands for a long while, remembering the weight of him when he was new to the world, how fiercely I had loved him, how fiercely I still did. I put the shoes on the highest shelf, out of reach, but never out of mind. That week, the reading group at the library grew. More children, more mothers with tired eyes and hopeful voices. One afternoon, I stayed late to help little Henry sound out his words. His mama waited by the door, her face anxious. "I'm sorry he's so slow," she whispered. "He's not slow," I said, kneeling to look Henry in the eye. "He's careful. Careful people make the best listeners." She smiled, a little hope flickering in her eyes. That was the best part of my days now, giving hope where it was thin. At home, I kept the lights on late, baking extra bread and setting aside slices for anyone who might need them. I listened to the radio, wrote in my notebook, and started dreaming again, not about weddings or big parties, but about simple kindness, the kind that can't be locked away. That Friday, a letter came in the mail from Emily's mother. The paper was heavy, the words clipped and formal. She thanked me for attending the engagement party, mentioned how lovely it was to meet me, then carefully suggested that perhaps, given the busy nature of wedding planning, I might prefer to simply attend as a guest and let her handle the arrangements. I folded the letter neatly and tucked it into my notebook under the entry I'd written about that first locked door. There are worse things than being left out, I told myself. Worse things than being unseen. That night, I sat on the porch, the crickets singing their rough song, the world soft around the edges. I watched fireflies blinking in the grass, and I let myself feel the hurt, let it run through me until it was just another old story, another lesson I'd carry. Because I knew something that Emily's mother didn't. You can lock a door, but you can't lock up love. You can hide a person, but you can't erase their kindness from the world. My life wasn't built in a ballroom. It was built in kitchens, in quiet rooms, in the pages of notebooks nobody would ever see. As the night deepened, I made myself another promise. I would keep living out loud, even if nobody noticed. I would fill my house with laughter and kindness and stories, and if Thomas ever found his way back, the door would be open. Because forgiveness is a kind of revenge too, a gentle, stubborn refusal to disappear. The summer slipped quietly into fall, and the world around me turned gold and red. I raked leaves in the yard, packed away the faded porch cushions, and pulled out old quilts from the cedar chest to warm the little ones during their library visits. My house, so often empty except for my own footsteps, had begun to feel full again, full of small voices, shy laughter, and the soft, steady rhythm of new purpose. Word spread about the free reading lessons. On Mondays and Wednesdays, my living room turned into a makeshift classroom. Children crowded around the battered old table, their pencils scratching over worksheets, their faces scrunched up in concentration. Sometimes their mothers or grandmothers lingered in the kitchen, offering to help slice apples or knead dough for biscuits. It wasn't grand, but it was real. Every evening, I wrote in my notebook about the children. Their struggles, their victories, the way they lit up when a word finally made sense. One afternoon, Ellie brought her older brother, Carter, who'd been held back in school. He slouched into the room, too cool for reading, but I remembered how Thomas used to stand just like that when he was 13, trying so hard to act like he didn't care about anything. I handed Carter a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web and told him to read the first page aloud. His voice was quiet, halting, but by the end of the lesson, he was reading whole paragraphs without stopping. "Not so bad, is it?" I asked, handing him a cookie. He shrugged, but I saw the smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. After they left, I sat in the silence, the house humming with a kind of peace I hadn't known in a long time. I thought about Thomas, about all the things I wished I could say to him. Not angry words, just honest ones. I wanted him to know that even after the storeroom, after the parties and letters and the growing distance, he was still my boy. He always would be. I wondered if he'd ever find his way back to that truth. That Sunday at church, Pastor Lane's sermon was about the lost sheep, about how love sometimes looks like waiting. Afterward, he stopped me in the fellowship hall, his hands warm and sure. "Miss Mabel, I hear you've started quite a little school at home. Those children are lucky to have you." I blushed, shaking my head. "I'm just doing what I can. Everyone deserves to feel seen." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "You've got a gift for lifting people up, even when you feel low. The Lord notices, even if the world doesn't." On the walk home, I watched the leaves drifting down, gold and brittle. I thought about all the ways I'd been hidden, by poverty, by grief, by my own child's shame. But I was learning that there was strength in being quiet, in listening more than I spoke, in letting kindness speak for me. Sometimes, revenge wasn't a shout. It was a whisper, a gentle persistence that outlasted the coldest heart. A few days later, as I swept the porch, a car pulled up in the drive. It was Thomas, alone this time, his suit jacket draped over one arm, looking tired and older than he should at his age. He stood at the gate for a while, just watching me. I kept sweeping, letting him come at his own pace. Mama, he said, finally, his voice uncertain. Afternoon, Thomas. He shifted from foot to foot, hands in his pockets. Can I come in? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He followed me inside, sitting at the kitchen table just like he used to. I poured us both sweet tea, set out a plate of biscuits, and waited. He didn't say much at first, just stared at his hands, fiddled with the salt shaker. At last, he looked up. Emily and I were having some trouble. She wants things a certain way. Her family, too. Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough for them. Like no matter what I do, it's wrong. I listened. I'd spent a lifetime listening. She says I need to dress better, act different, maybe even change how I talk. Sometimes I wonder if she'd still want me if I was just myself. I reached across the table and touched his hand. You're enough, Thomas. You always have been. He blinked hard, swallowing. For a moment, I saw the boy he'd been. The one who used to run to me with scraped knees and dreams bigger than the sky. He left soon after, saying he had to get back. But before he walked out, he paused at the door. I'm sorry, Mama. About before. I didn't mean to hurt you. I smiled, though my eyes burned. We all do what we think we have to. Just don't forget where you come from. After he left, I sat in the quiet and let the tears come. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd finally begun to regain. Thomas's apology was small, but it was real. A tiny crack in the wall between us. That night I wrote, sometimes the hardest people to forgive are the ones you love most. But forgiveness isn't for them. It's for you. It's how you take your heart back. The next week, Emily called, her voice tense, too bright. Thomas says you're helping kids with their reading? That's nice. I guess you have more time these days. She didn't ask how I was, didn't offer to help. But I told her about the children anyway, about how proud I was of every single one. I could tell she wasn't really listening, but that didn't matter. Some stories need to be told, even if no one hears. I hung up and went back to my kitchen, rolling out dough for pies, humming to myself. The house was full of love, messy, complicated, unbreakable. The kind of love you can't lock away. Because I'd learned something, quietly and slowly. My worth wasn't something anyone else could give or take. It was built, day by day, in small acts of courage, in the stubborn hope that even the most overlooked. The days grew short and the evenings cool, and my old house settled into the hush of early winter. I found comfort in small routines, kneading bread before dawn, pulling thick socks from the drawer, wrapping myself in my husband's faded cardigan when the wind rattled the windows. The children's lessons continued, their laughter chasing away the lonely corners, but there were moments, late at night, or just before sunrise, when the ache of Thomas's absence returned, sharp as ever. But life, as it does, kept rolling forward. Ruth called often, her voice a stubborn comfort. She was the only one I could tell about the strange hope growing inside me, the sense that my world was opening up in ways I hadn't expected. One Saturday, just as I finished hanging laundry, I heard a car door slam. I turned to see Thomas and Emily standing at the gate, their faces tight, eyes wary. Emily wore a coat that cost more than my old car, her hair perfectly styled. Thomas looked thinner, pale, and older than his years. They approached the porch together, but it was clear from the space between them that something had shifted. "Hi, Mama," Thomas said, his voice rough. Emily forced a smile. "We were in the neighborhood. Thought we'd stop by." I opened the door, motioning them inside. The kitchen was warm, filled with the smell of cinnamon bread just out of the oven. Emily hovered near the door, barely glancing at the children's artwork pinned to the fridge. Thomas fidgeted with his keys, glancing at Emily. "Mama, can we talk?" "Of course," I said, motioning them to the table. Emily sat with a sigh, smoothing her skirt. "We're having some issues," she said, looking at her nails. "I just thought marriage would be different. Easier." Thomas winced. Emily's parents think I should be working at her father's company by now. They don't think teaching at the high school is good enough. Emily jumped in, her tone sharper than before. "They're not wrong. We need a certain lifestyle if we're going to have a family. My parents have expectations. I watched them for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. Thomas looked like a child again, lost and ashamed. I poured tea, setting the cups in front of them, and sat down. You know, when your daddy and I got married, we had nothing but a beat-up truck and a hope that tomorrow would be a little better than today. We didn't have anyone's blessing but our own. Emily looked away, uncomfortable. Thomas stared at the table. You can build a life out of anything if you're willing to work for it and love each other through the lean years. But if you start by measuring who's worthy or who's enough, you'll always come up empty. Emily's lips tightened, but Thomas finally met my eyes. There was something raw in his face, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. I'm sorry, Mama, he whispered. I got so caught up in what they wanted that I forgot what really matters. Emily's phone buzzed. She picked it up, scanned the screen, and stood abruptly. I have to go. My mother needs me. She barely looked at Thomas as she hurried out, her heels clicking across the floor. I heard her car start up and pull away. Thomas sat there, head in his hands. I waited, letting him gather himself. I don't know what to do, Mama. Nothing I do is good enough. For her family, maybe for you, too. I reached across the table, my fingers gentle on his wrist. You've always been enough for me, Thomas. Always. But you have to decide what's enough for yourself. He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. We sat together, the old house quiet but safe, and I remembered all the nights he'd come to me as a boy, searching for comfort in the darkness. Later, after he left, I went back to my notebook. I wrote about courage, the courage it takes to stay true to yourself in a world that keeps asking you to change. I wrote about forgiveness, and about how sometimes the only justice left is the life you build for yourself after everyone else has given up. That evening, Ellie came by with a plate of cookies, her mother following close behind. Miss Mabel, Mama says thank you for helping Carter with his reading. He passed his test. I hugged them both, the warmth of their gratitude filling the hollow places in my heart. These were the moments no one could take from me, the quiet victories, the little kindnesses that stitched my days together. I realized then that I didn't need a grand gesture or a public apology. My justice was here, in the lives I touched, in the children I helped, in the love I gave without expecting anything in return. As I closed the notebook that night, I wrote, sometimes, the best revenge is to outlast the ones who doubt you. To live so fully and kindly that even those who would lock you away have to admit you can't be hidden forever. The air outside was cold and clean. I stood on the porch, looking at the stars, and felt something settle inside me. A peace that came not from being seen, but from knowing I never truly disappeared. The days that followed brought a strange calm. My routines held me steady. Up with the sun, coffee on the porch, lessons with the children, afternoons spent tending the last of the tomatoes and the winter greens. It was a quiet life, but one I'd grown to cherish. Evenings were for my notebook and a cup of tea by the window, where I could see the porch light glow like a promise that no one was ever truly alone in this house. One Thursday afternoon, as I helped Henry and Ellie with their reading, I heard a car pull up outside. The sound of 2 doors slamming, hurried footsteps, and voices raised just enough to tell me something wasn't right. I opened the front door to find Thomas and Emily on the porch, both pale, their faces pinched with worry. Come in, both of you, I said, guiding them inside. Emily paced the living room, unable to sit still. Thomas slumped on the couch, his hands knotted together. The children watched from the kitchen, sensing the storm in the air. Emily spoke first, her voice brittle. My father, he's cut us off. He says if Thomas doesn't leave his job and work for the family, we won't get a cent. Not for the wedding, not for the house, nothing. She looked at Thomas, her eyes bright with tears and frustration. He says we have to learn to stand on our own if we're going to insist on doing things our way. Thomas stared at the floor. I tried, Mama. I tried to make everyone happy, but it's never enough. I can't be who they want me to be. The silence was heavy. I sat down across from them, hands folded in my lap. Thomas, you were never meant to live someone else's life.
I didn't raise you for that.
I raised you to be good, to be honest, to stand on your own 2 feet, even if the ground is rough. Emily sniffed, looking lost for the first time since I'd met her. I don't know what to do. I've never been without all this. I nodded. You learn, honey. You learn to cook what you have. You learn to celebrate small things. You learn to love the life you make for yourself, not the one handed to you with a list of rules. The children slipped away, the house growing quiet but full. Thomas rubbed his eyes, exhausted. I feel like I've failed everyone. I shook my head. You haven't failed. You've just finally seen what matters. Emily sat very still, then surprised me by reaching for my hand. I don't know how to live poor, Mrs. Jenkins. I don't even know how to begin. I squeezed her hand gently. You start with kindness. You start with gratitude. You start with each other. It's not about what you don't have, but about what you're willing to share. They stayed for supper, simple stew and cornbread, laughter at the table, even Emily joining in as she watched the way the children ate with such delight. I saw something in her soften. Thomas smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. After the meal, Emily helped me clear the table. Thank you, she said quietly, for not turning us away. For everything. I smiled. Everyone gets lost, Emily. The lucky ones find their way home. That evening, after they'd gone, I sat on the porch and listened to the night sounds, crickets, a distant train, the hum of life carrying on. I opened my notebook and wrote, Justice doesn't always mean someone else pays. Sometimes it means you get your life back. You build a family out of forgiveness and the stubbornness to keep loving, even when you're hurt. That week, the reading lessons grew. More families sent their children. Some mothers stayed for coffee, sharing stories about jobs lost, dreams deferred, and the little ways they made it through. I listened, offered what I could, and watched as a new kind of family began to form around my table, one not bound by blood or money, but by kindness and survival. A week later, Thomas called to say he and Emily were looking at small houses in town. We want something we can afford, he said, pride and relief in his voice. Emily's learning to make biscuits. Not as good as yours yet, but she's trying. I laughed, my heart full. You tell her the secret is cold butter and patience. He paused. Mama, I know I can't take back what I did. The storeroom, the parties, all the times I put you last. But I want you to know I remember. And I'm sorry. I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in. We can't change the past, Thomas. But we can choose what we do next. That's what matters. That night, I found myself standing at the storeroom door. I opened it wide, letting light flood the shelves. I walked inside, touching the jars, the old photographs, the bits of my life I'd packed away. It didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a part of the story, one that had shaped me but couldn't hold me. I sat on the porch with my notebook and wrote, Sometimes, justice is not a thunderclap. It's the quiet return of hope. The air was cool and sweet. The stars above Alabama shimmered, silent and strong, and I felt something in me settle, finally, deeply, at peace. The first real cold snap arrived late that November. Frost etched lace on the window panes, and I pulled out my thickest quilt for the bed. The house was quieter now. The library group met only once a week, with holidays coming and the children busy at home. My days were steady, kneading dough, feeding the birds, walking the neighborhood loop with Ruth on the phone in my pocket, her voice a lifeline and a shield. Sometimes, I'd catch myself standing in the middle of the kitchen, hands resting on the table, thinking back on everything that had happened since that afternoon in the storeroom. The hurt had dulled, but the lesson stayed sharp. I'd learned how easily love could be turned to shame, how silence could both protect and wound. But I'd also learned that my life was my own, and no one, not even my own son, could erase what I'd built here. One windy morning, Thomas and Emily drove up together. Their old car rattled, but looked newly washed. Emily wore a sweater and jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. Thomas had dark circles under his eyes, but his smile was lighter. I met them on the porch, hugging my arms around myself against the chill. "Mama, can we come in?" Thomas asked, voice softer than I remembered. "Always," I said, stepping aside. Emily carried a brown paper bag filled with apples. "From the market," she said, setting them on the counter. "We thought you might like to make a pie." They sat at the kitchen table, side by side. I made coffee, the old percolator burbling its familiar song. It felt easy, almost normal. After a while, Thomas reached across the table and took my hand. "We signed a lease on a little house near the school," he said. "2 bedrooms, a yard for a garden. It's not much, but it's ours." Emily smiled, not the practiced way I'd seen at the engagement party, but open and real. I started substitute teaching. The children are wild, but I love it. We're figuring things out. Together. There was a pause. Thomas's voice turned shaky. "I know I can't ever make up for what I did. The storeroom, all of it. But I'm trying to do better. I want you to be part of our lives, Mama. No more hiding, no more shame." I squeezed his hand, letting the warmth pass between us. "You're my son. Nothing you do can change that. I just want you to be true to yourself and to her. That's how you build something that lasts." Emily wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. I thought money was everything, but it turns out biscuits and books and honest work are worth a lot more." We spent the afternoon together. I showed Emily how to peel apples for pie, how to make the crust tender with cold butter and gentle hands. Thomas fixed the creaky porch step without being asked. The house filled with laughter and the cinnamon smell of baking, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like a home where everyone belonged. After they left, I went to the storeroom one last time. I stood in the doorway, remembering that day, the shame, the ache, the sense of being locked away by the person I'd loved most in the world. But now the door stood open. I took a jar of last summer's blackberry jam, wiped the dust from the lid, and carried it to the kitchen. That evening, Ruth called. "How's your boy?" I smiled, looking at the fading light on the porch. "He's finding his way, Ruth. We all are." She snorted. "About time. Tell him his Aunt Ruth says he owes you Sunday dinner for the rest of his life." I laughed, a sound so easy it surprised me. Later, as the stars came out, I sat with my notebook and wrote, "Memory is a living thing. You can't choose which moments to keep or which ones to erase. But you can choose what you do with them. I choose to make them into something good." As the cold deepened, I set an extra place at the table, just in case. Not because I needed anyone to come, but because hope had made room for itself in my house again. That night, before bed, I stood on the porch and let the air sting my cheeks, filling my lungs with the bright sharpness of winter. I remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be locked away and overlooked. But I also remembered the faces of children learning to read, the sound of Ruth's laughter, and the look in Thomas's eyes when he finally saw me. Sometimes, the world tries to write you out of your own story. But quiet people like me, we keep writing, even when no one's listening. And sometimes that's enough. Winter softened into early spring, and the dogwoods outside my window bloomed in white clusters, bright against the last of the brown grass. I found myself waking each morning with a new kind of peace, a sense that nothing and no one could lock away the woman I had become. My little house, once so full of echoing silence, now vibrated with gentle voices, with the memory of laughter, the hush of stories shared, and the quiet courage that had seen me through. Thomas and Emily visited every Sunday. Sometimes they brought apples or a sack of pecans, sometimes they just brought themselves. They sat at the kitchen table, helped me bake, shared the small triumphs and worries of their new life. Emily's hands grew stronger. Sure, she learned to make biscuits so fluffy Thomas boasted about them at work, and Emily, at last, laughed without a trace of nervousness. There were hard days, of course. Money was tight. Sometimes the car broke down. Sometimes the arguments were sharp. But I watched them grow into their struggles, watched them choose each other over and over. They didn't always get it right, but they kept trying. That was more than enough. The library children returned with their backpacks, hair mussed and cheeks red from the cold. Henry brought his little sister to read. Ellie stayed late to help wash dishes and tell me all about her new baby cousin. My living room filled with their voices, with the warm clutter of pencils and notebooks, with the wild hope that every child brings. One rainy Saturday, Ruth came to visit. She brought a lemon cake, plopped it on my counter, and pulled me into a fierce hug. "You did it, Mabel," she said. "You stayed strong, even when that boy of yours couldn't see what was right in front of him. You kept living, and you made this house a home again." I pressed her hand, tears pricking at my eyes. Sometimes all you can do is keep going. Sometimes the only justice left is to be happy anyway. After Ruth left, I sat by the window and wrote my last entry in the blue notebook. The rain tapped on the glass, soft and patient. I let the words come slow, careful, as if they were the final stitches on a well-loved quilt. Silence is not surrender. To be overlooked is not to be erased. I am not less because someone else tried to make me small. I am the keeper of memories. The strength that goes unnoticed. The voice that whispers instead of screams. I am every meal cooked in love, every lesson taught in patience, every gentle word spoken when harsh ones would have been easier. My story is not over. My story is mine. That night, Thomas called to say thank you for the pie recipe I'd given Emily. She burned the first one, but the second was perfect. "We're getting there, Mama." I smiled into the quiet. "You're doing just fine, Thomas. Just fine." I fell asleep listening to the rain, no longer haunted by the sound of a turning lock. I had unlocked something in myself, something that could not be boxed away or hidden behind a door. I was no longer waiting for someone else to call me worthy. If my story spoke to your heart, share your story with me. And if you believe that quiet strength and memory matter in this world, I hope you'll subscribe. Sometimes the gentlest voices change the world, one whispered truth at a time.